BookTube, it's Kim at Middle of the Bookmarch, and today's video is a chatty one. I actually found an article that I thought was interesting, so I thought I would talk to you about it. And I'll have the link for it in the description box below. This is from a website called The Vessel. It's thevessel.io, and the title of it is People Who Grew Up Reading a Lot of Fiction Books Usually Have These 7 Unique Traits. And I read this and I'm like, yeah, I think I could recognize myself in those 7 traits. So I thought it sounded really interesting. And I've read a lot of different things over time and, online. And those of us who are bookish or love to read this much, we kind of also like to read about reading and read about books and along with reading books. So this has a lot of stuff to chew on, to maybe self-analyze. And I thought it was really fun. So let me tell you about the different things that the article talks about. Number 1 is they have a colorful imagination. Now, however, for whatever reason that you did read a lot growing up, or if you grew up around a lot of books, whenever you started reading as a kid or as a young person, there's, however, many different reasons for reading or why you read or how you got started. So for whatever reason that came about, you probably still have, to this day, a really good, colorful imagination. And I would say that it's good and could be positive and negative, because with very colorful imaginations comes people who may deal with some anxiety or deal with obviously getting stressed and thinking worst case scenarios, because your imagination does that to you. But reading a lot of fiction, it actually almost hones those skills, I think, and it builds and develops your imagination. So you do see things a lot more creatively, and so you can imagine things in a more vivid way. Sometimes your dreams are even more vivid. Let's see, what else does it say? One of the sentences says, as someone who grew up with my nose buried in fiction books, I've always found that they've helped me develop a super active imagination. And I think reading fiction does that to a person. It builds up your capacity for reading and really enjoying stories. Fiction, made up stuff, untrue, whatever, close to truth. But it's almost as if a fiction reader can has a stronger sense of imagination. Not to say that nonfiction readers don't, but I think you know where I'm going with this. It's almost like a skill that you learn, and it makes it stronger. So the second point is, it says they have a broader perspective on life, and it talks about being more open-minded and looking at different things, different ways people experience life, and coming to a more understanding of people. And I guess open-mindedness is a benefit, broad-mindedness. I think when you read fiction, there's an infinite number of possibilities of stories, and there always will be. And yeah, we can read a book and think, oh, I feel like I've read this story before, and not every story is brand new, and a lot of contemporary stories are based on classics, or based on a retelling, or based on something ancient that is timeless. So sometimes it gets to that point where deja vu, I've read this before, I feel like I've already read this story. But on the other hand, even reading classics that you may not be familiar with, I think it broadens the horizons, it broadens your outlook. And I truly believe this one is, those of us who are readers, it's very strong. The power is strong. We're almost like bookish Jedis. Yes, I said that. Number 3 is they have a natural gift for storytelling. I don't know if that means they can be more dramatic. I don't think so.
Yes.
Yes, my daughter says yes. But fiction readers, I think, especially if you're a reader and a writer, it simply is honing your skill. It's making it sharper. And you love to tell a story. You get into stories, and you tell great jokes. You like delivering a punchline. You know how to. deliver a story that people would be interested in. I think maybe an offshoot of that is, if you're a storyteller, you know how to tell a good story in a limited amount of space or time. And I think reading a lot of fiction does that as well. We quickly start to recognize this book is too long. It doesn't need to be this long. Or the book is short, or it's so fast-paced that I want it to be longer. We can recognize those things as we're reading our next novel. But I think a lot of fiction readers also love stories in their life. They love to talk about them. They love to make things up. They love to impart stories, or it can be a lot of fun. Number 4, they have a talent for escaping reality, quote, in parentheses, in a good way. Absolutely. That's probably one of the most early reasons I started reading, and why I read so much, and possibly why I read so much now, is it's a big tool for escape. And as a kid and as a young person, I was much more apt to read because I just needed to get out of there when I was not able to drive yet, and get out of the reality and the stresses of life. Whatever type of childhood you had, that was one of my reasons. It was a quick and easy way to just escape every day, the reality. And I think sometimes when it comes to people who really love reading fantasy or even science fiction, there's an even deeper sense of, I just want out. I want to spend some time in a completely made-up existence, a completely made-up world that will consume my brain and consume the thoughts that I have. And it's just a really good way to take time out of reality without spending money on a vacation. And fantasy books are spectacular for doing that. Number 5, they have a strong sense of self-awareness. That one was a little interesting. Strong sense of self-awareness. This part of the list is talking about is being able to empathize with characters, and empathy has something to do with it, but being able to relate to characters. And when you're reading a novel, you become quickly able to either relate to a main character or to identify with a main character or not. So you can discern pretty quickly, I either don't like this character, or I can see some of myself in them. And it's almost like it's a lot of self-awareness, but it's the ability to either learn more about yourself or to analyze. And it's interesting that fiction will do that, because I think in a way it's easier to imagine that nonfiction teaches us more about ourselves. And nonfiction will teach us a lot about the world, but so does fiction. And I think a lot of people who may not quite enjoy reading fiction so much are missing out on that, because there's so many ways that stories can teach us about the world, teach us about people that we may never meet in real life, teach us about situations we may never encounter. And novels do that very strongly. And all of us who read a lot of novels, I think, will agree with that. Number 6, they have a heart for others. Here's where empathy comes in. Empathy, compassion, what was the other word? Empathy, compassion, and kindness. Absolutely true. And just like I said before, reading novels introduces us and to scenarios we may never encounter, introduces us to people or types of people or groups of people we may never encounter. And so you almost have to have an open-mindedness in order to embrace fiction and in order to enjoy it to the point where you consume a lot of it. And I think being able to open our minds up to the world at large, or the world in general, without opening nonfiction, fiction is a great tool for that. And I hear this a lot from people that don't like to read in general, not even just fiction, but nonfiction as well. In my opinion, there's so many people that I've personally met in my real life that really need to read a good book, really need to sit down and just read a good book. Or what I say is a good book, what I advise them is a good book, because they really could use some open-mindedness. They could use some empathy and some kindness and compassion. And unfortunately, a lot of people who don't read aren't looking for that. And it always like, hurts my soul a little bit when I hear somebody say, oh, I haven't read a book since high school, or, oh, I don't ever pick up a book, and they're proud of it. Like, oh, okay. That's okay. The last one, number 7, they have a tendency to romanticize everyday life. And it goes on to say, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's definitely a thing. Maybe. And it might also have to do with the content of a novel that you may be reading. It's really easy to ascribe this to romance novels. So a person who reads a lot of romance may tend to romanticize things in life. Maybe. I think I've said maybe before, but yeah, it's easy to do that. If you're reading romance novels, usually have a very satisfying conclusion. So there's a beginning and usually a happily ever after. And that's part of the genre. And I think a lot of us who do read romance know that going in. You're going to have a pretty satisfying conclusion. So if that's what you read novels for, and it could be any type of novel, maybe you do that. Maybe it's nicer to romanticize everyday life. Maybe it's nicer to assume the best. It could be not the best thing to do all the time, because honestly, we have to remain realistic and pragmatic in a lot of areas. But it has a lot to do with escapism as well. And I don't know. What do you think about that topic of romanticizing everyday life? That's not always a bad thing, but we don't want to stay in that place, because then we won't make it through everyday life. We have to cope somehow. So yeah, those are the seven points in this particular article. And there are so many things that fiction is good for. And if not, one of the main ones is entertainment. Another one would be just recognizing art in literature, recognizing beauty in writing and poetry in the text, even if it's not poetry, if it's a novel. There's so many great reasons to read fiction, to read novels. And so many of them struck with me, especially escaping reality. It's a tool. It's a tool that I use. It's a reason I read, not the primary one, but it's a big reason I read. It's just a great means of escape where I don't have to physically go anywhere. I love what fiction does in my brain. I love what fiction does for my open-mindedness and for my sense of fun and frolic and looking at beauty in the world, because even with a book that has difficult content, there's still beauty in the novel. And if there's not, then it's just a bad book. So it's okay to put that one aside and go on to something else. I also think I used to feel like I was a writer. I was a writer when I was a young person, but I did realize as I got a little older that I don't, I thought I liked to write, but I actually love to read, and writing was not my thing. And I've had to write over the years for different school programs, but that's a lot different than fiction writing. But I did recognize early that I was not a fiction writer. But I love being a reader. I love recognizing the beauty in art and art in fiction. I love recognizing what fiction is doing in my heart and my brain. And I love the reasons we all choose to pick up a book or a piece of fiction. If it's a story or, a play, anything that's fictionalized. Almost all fiction is based somewhere in reality. And so it's quite easy to identify things and relate to things in fiction that we would be able to cope with or have to deal with or recognize in our own lives. So yeah, that's the interesting article I found. Just thought I would chat about it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And follow the link if you want to take a quick look at the article. It's very short. And I appreciate you staying this long and watching. See you all in the next video. Bye, everybody.